I'm going to grant you the resurrection. And so what I want is a logical entailment of any of the claims of the gospel, like Jesus being God, he has the power to forgive sins. Jesus rose from the dead. I'm going to give you that. He was clinically dead for 3 days, came back to life. What is the logical entailment? Explain to me your process.
Aliens raising Jesus from the dead. If you could point out that's a logical contradiction, I'm on board. Does not logically follow that God is the best explanation. Because if you can't identify the contradiction in ulterior explanations that underdetermine, then I can underdetermine it as much as I want.
As Christopher Hitchens put it a long time ago, you're still left empty-handed. Suppose it was the case that Krishna or some entity lifted up the hill in Hindu legend. It doesn't follow from that the doctrines and the central teachings of Hinduism is true.
Right.
But yeah, the same could be said, of course, of Muhammad splitting the moon. Like, suppose he did actually split the moon. This just wouldn't entail the truth of Islam.
In this video, I embark on tackling a popular response made by popular internet skeptics that even if we grant the resurrection as a fact or high probability, we would not be justified in logically entailing a religion out of that event. What? Contrary to popular belief, this truly is a high-level methodological objection to the Christian paradigm. One of the many reasons I never came to saving faith from my years of unbelief partially had to do with this very question. How could I demonstrate rational belief that it was the God of Christianity that rose Jesus from the dead instead of a totally natural phenomena like aliens or another pagan god playing some divine reverse psychology, so to speak?
Let's say B is the claim we're trying to verify, and B is that you can squat 400 pounds. If I know A, that you can squat 500 pounds, then I know that you can squat 400 pounds. That would be deductively. You can also make a logical entailment through induction, and that would be based off of inference. Can you squat 400 pounds? I know that you can deadlift 600. People who tend to be able to have that kind of strength on a deadlift, if you have that kind of quad, back, and glute strength, you can probably squat 400. But I wouldn't necessarily mean that.
Here I'd like to introduce a third type of reasoning, abductive reasoning. Induction is usually credited with making specific observations and gradually building up to general theory, whereas abduction attempts to work backwards from sparse data to come up with an inference to the best explanation. If you observe all of your friends enjoying a soup, you might use induction to conclude that the soup is tasty. Likewise, if you see a hot cup of coffee on a nearby table, you might use abduction to make a probable conclusion that the owner of the coffee will return soon. In the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry for abduction, the golden standard for research in philosophy, several authors have recently argued that not only is abduction compatible with Bayesian confirmation theory, the dominant view in scientific confirmation theoretic approaches, it is a much needed supplement to it. But before we do that, it's probably best to go ahead and review how Bayes' theorem works. Bayes' theorem provides a mathematical framework for updating the probability of hypotheses, example, the Christian God causing the resurrection of Jesus, based on new evidence. In the ideal scenario, evidence is counted as raising the final probability of a given hypothesis, if it is more probable to occur given that specific hypothesis. Nevertheless, a persistent metacritique persists in Bayesian philosophers. How does one differentiate between hypotheses? Many recent scientific philosophers like Lipton argue that Bayesian priors can be scrutinized by means of abduction, that is to ask, how well does the hypothesis explain all the relevant data? Simply put, explanations must meet the following criteria. 1. It aligns closely with the evidence. 2. It minimizes unnecessary assumptions. And 3. Are internally coherent and contextually supported. Likewise, when it comes to Jesus' resurrection, alternative hypotheses, aliens, deceptive agents, require contrived motives or unsupported assumptions, lowering their explanatory power. This leads me to my second concept, the idea of first-order deception as an additional recursive perspective social inference compared to truth-telling. Now, what in the bloody hell did I just say? What does that mean? Well, reverse psychology relies on understanding how others perceive your intentions. As you add layers of bluffs, the task becomes increasingly recursive. First order thinking, you think about what the other person might believe or want. Second order thinking, you think about what they think you believe or want. Third order thinking, you think about what they think you think they believe or want, and so on. This recursive process is cognitively demanding because each layer requires maintaining a mental model of the other person's beliefs, intentions, and reasoning strategies. This aligns with the concept of the theory of mind, the ability to attribute mental states to oneself and others. Even if the agent is omniscient, adding unnecessary complexity is, I repeat, epistemically contrived unless there is evidence to justify it. So we're not totally blind in metaphysical space when it comes to assessing these scenarios. Furthermore, studies in neuroscience also support the idea that tasks involve higher levels of reasoning and prediction, like those in bluffing or reverse psychology, activate the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functions including working memory, complex decision making, inhibition control to suppress immediate reactions and plan strategically. In fact, this same research indicates that the concept of simply lying is and of itself requires more recursive perspective social inferences than simply telling the truth, making it less cognitively simple, less logical, and less probable. Extrapolating from this, agents using deception are inherently more ad hoc and less probable compared to agents acting straightforwardly. For example, activities like playing chess or poker, which involve anticipating opponents' moves, demonstrate that deeper planning layers akin to multiple layer bluffs significantly increase cognitive load. Or take for example someone eating food. We can reasonably adduce that the most likely explanation is that they were hungry, rather than trying to pull off some reverse psychology to get you into thinking so. Other studies in computational biology and artificial intelligence indicate that multi-layer reasoning resembles recursive algorithms that grow exponentially in complexity. For instance, a single-layer bluff might involve one decision node. Double and triple bluffs require exponentially more mental computational power to simulate and predict outcomes. The increased demand parallels concepts in game theory, where the number of possible outcomes and their corresponding calculations grows with the depth of recursive reasoning. Besides social neuroscience, other areas of data that indicate this model of agency and the theory of mind include developmental psychology and strategic interaction studies. In social neuroscience, studies of games like the iterated prisoner's dilemma demonstrate that individuals who engage in multi-level reasoning exhibit increased neural activities in regions associated with prediction and reward evaluation. In developmental psychology, young children struggle with recursive perspective taking tasks, for example, false belief tasks, suggesting that such reasoning develops with cognitive maturation. In strategic interaction studies, experiments in deception and counter-deception, in the example of cognitive games, show that deeper bluffs are more cognitively taxing and prone to failure if the cognitive load overwhelms the individual. So we've established that reverse psychology, ulterior motives, and complex bluffing do indeed demand more computational brain power. They involve recursive thinking, increased cognitive load, and ad hoc assumptions that make them akin to solving dynamic, multiple variable puzzles in real time. The thinking a few moves ahead analogy is particularly apt. Now, what the hell does this all have to do with the cause of Jesus' resurrection? Well, simply put, it means that whenever we see an agent causing an action, our best explanation is one that assumes that the agent's reasoning behind that action is straightforward and truth-telling, as opposed to lying, double, triple, quadruple bluffs. This means that the more ulterior motive that an agent may have for bringing about a seemingly supernatural event like a resurrection, say for example experimenting aliens or deceptive gods, then the more contrived and ad hoc the scenario becomes. Therefore, by virtue of being less ad hoc and creating a more complex mental map of the intentions of the divine agent, the Christian God resurrecting Jesus from the dead is therefore more probable than some divine trickery or aliens rising Jesus from the dead.
Pray sniping, subscribe to a channel. Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. The thinking atheist. Oh man, we're in for a treat. Cause you know he's just a 16-year-old that thinks he's smarter than everybody. Yeah, I see you prey sniping. You're that kid in the back of the classroom with that Minecraft t-shirt and you flip the pen in your hand over and over again. Out Richard Dawkins quotes you found on Reddit. And your grades are probably really but no, I get it. You're a different kind of intellect and you're a different kind of learner. Right.
I need to prove that I'm smarter than everybody, so I'm just gonna become an atheist. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Wow, you'll tell you what, you're a real thinker.
Given the absurdity of positing something as spectacular as the resurrection as a brute fact, I think it's safe to say that something like the resurrection of Jesus would have a reason or purpose that explained it, and to say that aliens or pagan gods rose Jesus from the dead only further obscures the ability to identify that purpose provided Jesus' self-understanding and high Christology, for it is not obvious to anyone that Jesus proclaimed foreign deities, extraterrestrials, advanced technology, or other worlds or planets. Paul Moser gives this key insight in his book, The Evidence for God, Religious Knowledge Re-Examined, where he emphasizes the personal and relational nature of divine action. He argues that miracles with a clear relational and moral purpose, consistent with a particular religious tradition, are more likely to reflect the volitions of a specific deity, and thus more probable than aliens or pagan deities. Furthermore, Robin Collins, in the Blackwell Handbook to Natural Theology, suggests that both fine-tuning and context-specific miracles rely on recognizing patterns that are statistically improbable and carry specific significance. For fine-tuning, this involves precise calibration of physical constants. For miracles, there are deviation when nature is left to its normal probabilistic trajectory. In both cases, he argues for inference to an intelligent agent as the best explanation. For fine-tuning, the explanation is the design of a universe hospitable to life. For miracles, the explanation is divine action aligned with a specific religious narrative or purpose. Collins connects the fine-tuning argument to the nature of the designer, arguing that both the intricate calibration of the universe and the meaningful timing and context of miracles suggest a personal agent with specific intentions, namely permitting intelligent life and validating Christianity. Take this thought experiment as an example. A message written clearly in Hebrew in the sky by the stars that said Yeshua HaMashiach Hun Adon, which highly suggests a creator that can be known and desires to be known. Now, who cares if all human languages are made up and are not necessarily indicative of the language of the supernatural deities in metaphysical space? Well, my answer to that would be the very fact that the natural order, despite overwhelmingly statistical hurdles, managed to produce an intelligible message to us humans indicates some form of personal agency, and a powerful one at that. Finally, there's one more consideration at play here, and that is the idea that prophecy is a high-context miracle. In my countless search queries for anything related to the subject at all, I came across the debate religion subreddit. Lo and behold, I came across an unexplored type of argumentation. A top theist contributor argued that ex-ante predictions and corroboration, as opposed to post-hoc rationalizations, is another way of framing the argument that a miracle's context informs its agency. Despite not knowing this Redditor at all, I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually the groundwork for a thesis on the epistemology of miracles for a philosophy degree. He writes, compare and contrast. A king wants to know whether to go to war, so a priest slaughters a chicken, examines the entrails, and declares whether it's a good idea or not. Versus a king who also wants to know whether to go to war, so a priest takes the chicken, predicts from non-lethal investigation details of what he will find inside, then kills the chicken and finds his prediction corroborated. Moses, likewise, expects prophets to predict the future and get it right. Scientists can do this in limited circumstances, with weather prediction sometimes straining one's credulity, and this is a major reason why we give them so much money. In a way, prophecy is a form of evidence that credits an agent to be reliable by keying in on the question of who or what caused the prediction to come true. We are then left with the man Jesus of Nazareth proposing some level of divine knowledge or power. And if predicting a resurrection be the case, even the step from sufficiently knowledgeable or potent to omniscient or omnipotent seems far more manageable. Granted, I admit that such a judgment relies on an intuition on the levels of agency a supernatural being must exhibit before we can entertain the idea that such an entity has omni attributes, granted the quote-unquote confines of the universe, so to speak. Nevertheless, it can be demonstrated, given the philosophical cultural syntax of ancient Israelite religion, that Israelites believed the Lord to be merely sufficiently knowledgeable and or potent, as opposed to all-powerful or omnipotent, for such concepts were not within their linguistic framework. It is a reminder that the Lord does not call us to uncritical obedience, just as Abraham argued with God at Sodom and Gomorrah, and Moses repenting before the Israelites. In fact, Jacob, from whom the name Israel was given, means one who wrestles with God. A deity with whom you wrestle is not a deity who requires blind, uncritical trust. A deity who allows one to build critical trust with them, on the contrary, is a deity who respects our ability to predict, even if that deity also works hard to enhance that ability. You cannot enhance your ability to predict unless you can collect successes and failures, analyzing them and modifying said ability when called for.
I'm happy to be shown that I'm wrong. Can we define supernatural?
A miracle is a sensible operation contrary to the established course of nature and taken to be divine, having a godlike cause.
Wow, we don't know of any natural explanation for this. Unconvinced by proposed natural explanations, therefore I am justified in claiming that it's supernatural.
Especially when you have Jesus claiming that he's God's uniquely divine son and predicts his resurrection from the dead.
In short, the PSR is the metaphysical principle that every fact has an explanation, that is, a sufficient reason.
Hillbilly dilly, you need a reasonable cause for how Jesus could have predicted this, admitting he had special knowledge, and if he claims that God will raise him from the dead, then he knew God raised him from the dead. As a final rejoinder to this video, the insightful inquirer rightfully asks, well then, to what degree of specificity and or plurality does a miracle validate a religious tradition? For example, Hindus would see the resurrection of Jesus as proof that Vishnu incarnated in a localizable religion, and the myriad of denominations of Christendom, Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants that affirm the resurrection are ubiquitous and superfluous. In this case, perhaps it's useful to reframe the question of which religion as more so the question of the most probable logical explanation, as opposed to a direct logical entailment. Here, I'd like to defer my apologetic work to the theologians, whose entire enterprise is built off of trying to explain these acts of divine orchestrations. At the end of the day, your Christian religion is ideally an attempt to explain the events and miraculous deeds surrounding the Israelites, Jesus of Nazareth, and the early church. As long as you do so in good faith, I can, in good confidence, encourage you that despite the vastly different portraits of God everyone finds themselves staring at, all those who seek the truth shall find, and all those who ask, it will be given. God bless y'all and take care. Peace. So it's funny that the only relevant interaction I've seen from the academic literature pertaining to this argument is this hand-wavy response from Larry Shapiro, and a series of responses that Colombetti and Cavan made to 97% genius Dr. Richard Swinburne. The latter of those works basically incorporates the problem of evil into what they call a negative natural theology, whereby evil is somehow evidence of the evil God hypothesis. Anywho, aside from the annihilatory refutation that Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy documents in its entry on the logical problem of evil, I'd say that the problem has been casually debunked by this video made by Apologetics Squared. Case in point, my intuition says evil, or the standard model of particle physics, yeah, get that in your head, right? In no way immediately requires a supernatural explanation or lack thereof, whereas the resurrection of Jesus certainly undergirds whether or not the supernatural is involved. Then, after assuming the agent is all-powerful, we can extrapolate that they are causally connected to the allowance of suffering. But even then, the Christian virtue ethic easily compensates for this by incorporating suffering as a necessary experience to growing higher-order virtues like self-sacrifice, perseverance, agape love, and so on. Anywho, another video for another day. But that being said, if you guys enjoy topics more akin to this philosophically dense video and boost the chances the algorithm shares to other folks, don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. Peace.